This is a fun project with really, really loose strokes, and we're going to start by grabbing a little bit of yellow light with our number 2 round. We're going to add some little gentle strokes and dots and dabs of that color in and around these far left flowers. You don't need to worry about whether or not they're perfect, whether or not they cover the lines. In fact, the looser and more relaxed you are, the better off you are. I'm always kind of stroking in or out from where I think that little flower is going to grow, giving me a little bit of dimension. And you can pick up more or less color, so you have some more transparent petals and you have some darker or deeper petals depending on what you would like to do. You'll notice here I'm just essentially letting the brush run out of color, which is making the petals in the background look a little bit lighter. And the more you do that, the softer they'll be. Let's grab a little bit of thinned sap green, and by thinned I mean transparent sap green, with our number 2 round. We're going to start these next flowers off to the right here a little bit. These are kind of just little tufts or balls of green flowers, so we're going to use a lot of stippling, which is really just kind of pressing down with the brush in little dabs with a little bit of that sap green color. Leave lots of white open spaces. We absolutely want to make sure that we leave lots of white open spaces there that give us, a little bit of light in the background showing through. And just have fun with them. They can be little, they can be large. You can really paint these any way that you want. Again, I'm letting that brush run out of color, so it makes a softer green as I move to the right, or in my mind, move a little bit into the background. Feel free to pause this video and take a breath and kind of decide what you want to do. You don't have to paint these the same color I am. Let's rinse our brush very well and pick up a little bit of a different tone. Let's look at picking up just a wee bit of pink. We're going to use a Quin Rose, and we're just going to dab a little bit of Quin Rose fairly transparently into these next flowers. Again, don't worry about it being perfect. We're just going to allow that Quin Rose to kind of sit there gently as we go. And we can shade them after with lots and lots of other colors and different touches of color throughout as we go. So we'll get that softly in place. And then we can pick up just a little bit of Alizarin Crimson and add some dots in there. And those dots are going to give us our shading. We're adding the dots in the center area of the flower. So really what we're doing is we're just tapping kind of near where we imagine the center of the flower to be. And that's going to give us that shadow color that we want to give us more depth and dimension. The more values you add, darks, mediums, and lights, the more depth and dimension you have. And again, I'm just making up dots here. I'm just adding dots or dashes outside the lines to give these wildflowers just that kind of wilder effect and look. Let's mix a little bit of orange with yellow light and a red light or red medium color. We're going to use our number 2 again. We've got 2 sections of flowers here. We're going to work on, I would say, the bottom one first, and we're going to actually take intentional strokes and stroke that color in and out to form a little bit of a petal look. Doesn't matter if you get it right or wrong, doesn't matter if the stroke is perfect every time, because then again we come in and we add little dots and dashes over top regardless. Sometimes I'm picking up more blobs of orange, sometimes less, and letting the brush run out of paint to give me some dimension. Let's grab a bit more red in that mix. We'll do some shading in the very center. Again, just dots. You could use crimson or red light to get those dots in place. It just gives us just a really beautiful effect of shadow, and with red is such a wild, beautiful color. Purple. So let's mix some purple with rose and ultramarine and make it a little bit transparent so that we can do these next flowers. And you want to make sure you have really clean paint or the purple will, or water, because the purple will look muddy if you don't. More strokey bits. That orange and purple really kind of play off each other. And I'm just going to pull that color down into the center of that flower, kind of forming a little bit of a bellflower or a thistle shape. Nothing specific. We're not naming these flowers. Pick up a little more purple and let's dab it into the base of the petal while it's wet. Just gives us some variety and some dimension. And then as I go here, I want to make sure that I'm not always inside the lines. So when I stroke this, I'm not really kind of worrying that it starts at the exact edge and comes in we're just filling in dots, dabs, and dashes in a really gentle, relaxed manner. Let's pick up a little ultramarine and shade the bottom of these while they're wet. So I'm just adding a little bit of shading at the bottom of each of these little flowers. If it's not wet, it doesn't matter. It'll just look a little darker. If it is wet, it looks a little softer. And now we'll go back. So rinse your brush well, use red light plus a touch of yellow mixed together, and let's shade these yellow flowers. Now we're working wet on dry, meaning the flower's dry. We could have done it wet on wet, but we didn't. That's going to give us much more specific dots and dashes at the base of each one of these petals. And it's okay if it's a little bit darker. It's okay if it's a little bit lighter. Here I've just taken a bit of water and softened these a bit. So I've added the color, take a bit of water, dab it back over top if I felt it was too stark or too harsh. You can basically just blend it into that water as you go. You could repaint this project 20 times in different colors, and it's a great, simple, fun project. You can also just transfer a couple vases or one vase and use it on the front of a card or something a little bit more simplified than all four in a row. So we keep going with these little dots of orange at the base of each one of these flowers, and just enjoy the process and take your time. Again, feel free to pause the video. I'm going to take a little bit of Alizarin Crimson and I'm going to further shade with my number 2 round these red flowers. More dots and dashes, and not too many, just a little bit here and there to add some depth and dimension. Phthalo Blue plus Sap Green makes this really beautiful tone, and that's going to richen up these little balls of green here that I love so much. They're one of my favorite filler flowers and mini flowers to paint. You really notice with the number 2 round, as much as I make brushes and love to make sure that you have great brushes in your hands, you really can paint this entire project with that number 2 round, and you don't necessarily need anything else. You could also use a number 6 round. I'm just going to grab a little bit of orange here. Sorry, I got off track. And a bit more Alizarin Crimson and get some additional shading in these orange flowers. And I think we've got the flowers pretty well wrapped up. Start on our vases. Phthalo Blue plus white makes a beautiful, beautiful turquoise color that I just love, and it's really pretty on glass. It's just a great glass color. I'm going to wet the vase first, not too wet, just damp, and we're going to paint wet on wet for most of these vases, if not all. Let's get a little bit of that blue on the left-hand side. And just kind of working it. There's no growth direction to vases, but I'm pulling that color down straight to almost look like a little bit of striation in the glass itself. And I wanted it to be a bit darker. I just wiped off the brush, and I'm going to come in and fill in that vase, leaving a little bit of white if I can in the center, just to add some depth. Leave open spaces, always, always. You can always fill them in later, but it's nice. And where that blue pooled in the upper left, I'm probably going to leave that just because I think it looks like shadow. Sometimes those shadows happen unintentionally. I'm just going to drop a bit of Quin Rose in here, and it kind of forms a violet color because the blue and the Quin Rose make purple, which is really pretty. So a bit of an accent there. I'm going to wet my next vase and deciding which color to paint. Sometimes I decide on the fly. For this one, it's going to be pink. So I'm going to grab some rose color. It could be Quin Rose, could be Opera Rose. And again, we're going to just dab it on the far left. We're imagining all of our darkest areas are on the far left, and work it more horizontally into the center of the vase this time. I would wipe my brush at this point. I should be wiping my brush off at this point and blending, because there's a lot of water and color in there, and it's kind of swimming around a fair bit. But instead, I'm going to add some darker color and let it do what it wants. So sometimes it's better to do this in 2 layers, but here it's such a relaxed style that we're just dropping some of that color in and letting it live. Let's wet the 3rd vase, and we're going to paint this one green. So what I want to do is grab just a little bit of my Sap Green and make sure that it's not too dark, because we've got green little sort of fillers and stems and leaves to come in, But let's get that sap green at the top of the vase and on the left-hand side and begin to work that into the vase itself. You can also use sap green plus a little bit of yellow to make sure we're not too dark, to give it more of a limey tone. But what we're doing here is we're making sure that we have values from each of the flowers, maybe in the vases, and values from the vases and the flowers. So we're creating essentially a coordinated composition. But we're just going to block this in, vertical strokes on this guy, leaving a little bit of white space in the middle. And then we're going to work on our fourth vase. Let's add a little touch of Phthalo Blue on the far left to tint this vase a little bit and give it a bit more variety of color. We don't want it to necessarily be one color. And then I'm going to just rinse the brush, blot it off, and I do want to blend this one in a little bit to the left, just a wee bit. It's pooling so much on the left there that I'm worried it's going to dry with a bit of a weird hard line, so I just softened it in a bit. And you can definitely come back and do that to lots of these. Now we're going to paint an orange vase, so let's begin by wetting the vase. And again, we're picking orange to kind of tie into some of these other colors. And then pick up a bit of yellow light and paint it into the far left of the vase. We're going to begin with a lighter value and just establish the shadow area, leave some white space in there. And then let's have some fun with layering with a little bit of orange over top. And you probably have orange on your palette, but if not, just a reminder, your orange is mixed in this project with a yellow light and a little bit of a red light or red medium, whatever you have on your palette that's a nice kind of bright sunshine red, we'll call it. When we get those colors in, then I'm going to get even deeper with a bit more of that darker orange color. And that's just made with more red in my orange mix. You don't want to go pure red or it'll overwhelm entirely. We want to let these vases dry for a little bit and move on to something else, because for the most part, those vases are going to be pretty wet. So a little bit of sap green and the fine point of our Callia round, and we're just going to come in and basically fill in some stems. They do not have to be right over top of the lines that you have. And in fact, sometimes it's nice to just add extra stems that aren't exactly over top of those lines because they just look like little flyy bits coming out from the flowers itself. And you just want to kind of also add your dots and dashes and your bits and bobs to look like those little leaves are dispersed and kind of flying all around a bit. When you add your stems, you'll notice I'm kind of touching at the base of where I think that stem starts, pulling upwards or pushing upwards usually. I'm doing the opposite of that advice right here. But if I do that on a stem and I lift the brush a little bit, I tend to get a much lighter stroke. You'll see here that as I add these, I'm really not worried about whether or not they come right over top of that dark graphite line. And you can pick up little bits of darker green as you go and just add those into some of the spaces that you're working on. So you have a couple varieties of green in those stems. You can always tell when I pause that I'm thinking and just working through in my head if there's anything I want to do a little bit differently. Here I'm pulling downwards on the stem. Normally I turn it upside down and pull upwards. Either way is fine. The point of these projects is that we get to be really loose and relaxed and we don't have to worry about it. We're going to just add some final touches on the vase. So take some darker values. Try to find a value that's similar to what's already in the vase. And I'm just kind of outlining some of those sides and bottoms and tops with a little bit of darker color to make sure that I've got a little bit of smoothness. In some cases, I add additional dots of shadow. And in other cases in this stage, I will add accents. Right now, though, I want to make sure that the lip of the vase has a little bit of depth and dimension. And the edges have a little bit more, we'll say a little bit more value scale, a little bit more darkness. And you'll also notice I quite often do it where the vase is curving, where the neck comes in. I'll add a few little dots there just to kind of look like the vase is sort of stopped and curved outward. It gives it a little bit more depth and dimension. I'm just looking anywhere I see here that needs a little bit more specific. I'm trying to think if the word is specificity. Probably not. But anywhere that needs to be tightened up a little bit, anywhere that I want to add some directional strokes to give me some life and some movement, I'm going to do that throughout the entire composition. Often these final stages are where we get the opportunity to tie things together even more than before. We can add color into other colors. Again, you saw me just do that neck and the bottom. I'm a big fan of stippling, so there's dots in almost every project I do out there. And I'm just going to evaluate what might be missing here or if I need anything else. From the perspective of final touches, I sometimes leave things for a day or a night and then take a look at things after. But what I do want to make sure is that I have, especially on the bigger flowers, as much kind of detail as I feel I need to draw some attention to them. The bigger flowers have more going on in them because they're a little bit less of a single loose stroke and more of an actually formed floral shape. So let's take some really dark alizarin crimson and just add some touches to the edge of the petals and add some touches to the inside where we feel we need to have some connecting dots. This is just going to finalize these little petals and give us a bit more depth and dimension to them and make them look more like a complete flower versus a stroke that's compiled a flower. So just playing around with a little bit of that dark alizarin crimson, and then I think once these are done, I will be finished. But that doesn't have to stop you. You can keep going and paint these vases in a million different colors and play around with them all night long. Thank you so much.